Today I'm going to talk about the root cause as to why many people walk with one or both feet turned out, otherwise commonly known as duck feet. This is a very common strategy, and if you pay close enough attention, almost every single person walks with one foot at least turned out a little bit more than the other. The reason for this is that people are trying to find a strategy to push themselves forward in space and propel ourselves forward. There's a couple of necessary key points to the gait cycle that are important to understand so that way we can make better sense of this duck foot presentation. Now, in order to move through the world in the gait cycle, we have to create some strategy of propulsion, which means that we move from a position of relative pronation and internal rotation of our shin and lower leg to a position of push-off, which is a higher arched supinated position of our foot and more of an externally rotated position of our shin and lower limb. When we load our body weight onto one side, we call this mid-stance phase of gait. The other leg is off of the ground at this point. Now, in order for us to load our body weight onto one side, something needs to yield into the ground, which means our foot arch needs to drop. This creates a position of the foot where stuff on the bottom side of the foot is going to stretch out. So that way, as we move over our foot, it can spring back up again and we can move forward into late stance, which is that position where we are on our big toe and pushing forward. So essentially, we move from a position of internal rotation and dropping of the foot arch to external rotation and propulsion and raising of the foot arch. The issue is that many people are in a situation where they have an externally rotated tibia, meaning that this tibia bone right here is twisted outward relative to this femur. This means that the tibia bone can't properly internally rotate and twist in to allow for the necessary pronation to occur for us to then create propulsion. So if you were to look at someone like this, it would look like this lower tibia bone is pointed out here with this femur pointed down or slightly inwards. This means that the tibia can't properly internally rotate to allow for this foot arch to properly drop as we load our body weight onto this side in mid stance. And if my tibia is turned out, that's going to bring my foot out with it in many cases, and that is going to give me a strategy. So that way when I strike the ground, I can find the inside arch of my foot and create a strategy of propulsion. Now, this is a compensatory way to find the inside edge of the foot as opposed to getting that genuine tibial internal rotation, which will allow the foot arch to genuinely drop with it pointing pretty straight ahead. Now you may be wondering, well, what if I have this on just one side, or I have it on both sides, but one side is more significantly turned out than the other? Well, that one side that is turned out more is representative of something that's going on higher in the chain. Now, everyone has asymmetry. It just depends on how significant it is. In this turned out duck foot presentation, you have one of two potential options going on. The first is that more turned out side is on the side that you are leaning on more so. This would be the higher hip in a lateral pelvic tilt presentation. Again, almost everyone has some degree of this. The question is just how significant is it? If I have a higher hip, that hip is going to be more internally rotated and turned in, which means that the lower limb is going to be seeking a compensatory strategy to find external rotation. Now you're going to see a tibia that's turning out relative to a femur that's turning so far in. Now, the other common reason I see it is it's on the side that they're turned away from. So let's say I'm turned to the right side and my left side's really far forward, relatively speaking. That is going to turn my femur out into external rotation. And now you're gonna have a hip that's so forward and turned to the other side that the whole hip is gonna be turned out into external rotation and the foot's gonna follow it. The reason why I'm using the right side as the example here is because it is more common. The human body is naturally biased towards the right side, meaning that we tend to see more turned out right feet relative to the left. And this is something you can start to notice in your day-to-day life. Start looking at people's feet when they walk. You'll never unsee it for the rest of your life how common a turned out right foot is relative to the left. If you want to learn more about this pattern and also variations of it, you can check out my video on it that I'll link down below, and also my lateral pelvic tilt video. And in these types of cases, it is really helpful to address what's going on at your hips and how that's affecting everything down the chain. So those videos will be very helpful for you in that. But what we need to do locally at the foot and can give us some really nice results is to couple genuine foot pronation with tibial internal rotation. We need to couple these things together as opposed to being stuck in that externally rotated position, forcing ourselves to use a compensatory strategy to find that inside arch. Now, the first thing we need to do is make sure we have that tibial internal rotation. Here is a great exercise for restoring that internal rotation. What we're gonna do to set up for this first option, is get a bench or some object we can keep our whole foot flat, and we have a 90-degree bend at both our knees and our hips right here. I wouldn't go higher than that because this is about the right amount of height here where we can really get a good grip of our shin and go through this effectively through the full range of motion. We also have a band around the upper part of the tibia bone. So that is the bottom of the knee, or the top of the bottom of the knee. So if we have our kneecap right here, we have this bone right here under it. We have the band just around the top portion of it right here. So that way we can get a good grip on it. And the band should be tight enough to where you can get some good tension and friction, but not so tight to where it's cutting off any blood supply. And then what we're gonna do is get the whole foot flat on that bench right there, and we have a staggered stance. And the important thing here throughout the duration of this entire exercise is we keep our hips square, or as square as we possibly can. So this looks good right here, foot's flat in the back, and now we're gonna grab hold of that band and wrap our fingers around our tibia, get a good grip here. Now we're gonna start always the whole foot's flat, but we're gonna start in this negative shin angle position. So this angle right here should be like so, and we have our weight mostly on our outside heel. Now, as we slowly come forward, pushing our knee over our second toe, we're gonna twist pretty aggressively, about a 6 or 7 out of 10, and progressively twist more and more the more this knee goes over the second toe. What we're going to feel is our weight transition from this point right here, that negative shin angle, outside of the heel. As we go forward, we're going to transition our weight more onto the inner heel and first metatarsal head right here. So that's basically on my foot right here and right here. We're not rolling onto the inside edge and losing the outside edge. We're just focused on that transition right there from the outside to the inside. And then we're just going to untwist as we come out. So untwist, go on the outside heel, twist forward progressively as you go more and more into dorsiflexion and pronation of your foot. Okay, so from a side view, we've got this negative tibia angle to start. He's gonna grab the band, start on the outside heel, then as he comes forward, he's gonna twist, and he's gonna go transition more into the inside edge of his foot. The most common mistake on this exercise is people are going to twist their hip outside of their knee, and the knee is going to dive inside the foot. So for optimal restoration of movement of the tibia and the femur and the foot, we need to make sure that everything stays in line. So we should have a perfectly straight line here as much as we can. So if Trevor, you grab and then you try to keep everything in line as you come forward, beautiful, just like that. If your hip ever starts to dip outside, then you're probably moving too much through your hip. And you're probably also going to put too much stress on the inside of your knee right there. As you progress through this, you can do a couple more sets, but roll the band down a little bit further on your tibia right there. So maybe a couple inches further down, you can do the same exact thing. For some people, this is very helpful. And then you could progressively work it down to the point where you are even lower than that, maybe right about here. But different people have different bone structure, so it will depend on what works best for you. Ideally, at least do up here and maybe a little further down. If you want, you can go even lower. If that position on the bench isn't comfortable for you, what you could do is get in this half kneeling position with your back knee directly underneath your back hip. And you also have right here, this foot out in front, a little bit more than a 90-degree angle, so that way you can start in, again, that negative tibia angle. Grab it and then just do the same exact thing. Again, making sure that everything stays in line, the knee's going over the second toe, outside heel to inside edge. Now we're working locally at the foot here, but as this video suggested, it's massively important we don't forget about what's happening up top within the pelvis and even potentially the upper body as well, because these things are ultimately connected, and your foot being turned out is representative of what's happening, yes, at the foot, but also the hip. So if you want a comprehensive approach to this that addresses many common movement limitations, including this, you can check out my Lower Limb Foundations program, but also my Beginner Body Restoration program. I will link those down below in the description. Now we need to couple that with genuine foot pronation. And there is a specific way I like to do this to make sure you're getting that internal rotation of the tibia working with it. And here's how you can do that.
To set up for this activity, you're gonna have your feet staggered apart and something to hold on to if you need that rack support. The stagger is going to be about 1 foot length between his rear toe and his heel. To start out, we want Connor's shin to be plantar flexed, where he has this greater angle between his foot and his tibia. That's going to allow him to move from a place of external rotation into a place of internal rotation as he goes through this pronation drill. What we want to focus on feeling starting out is the outside edge of that heel, his knuckle of the big toe and knuckle of the pinky toe. We don't want his toes to be changing color like he's gripping the ground or he has a lot of weight in that forefoot to start out. We want to really be back on that heel. So to initiate this, what Connor's going to do is he's going to turn his hip of the leg that is forward with him. And what that's going to do is it's going to drive the knee forward. It's going to move his weight from the outside edge of this foot towards the inside edge of that heel or his calcaneus and onto the inside ball of that forefoot. And we still want to make sure you can sense his heel throughout this motion. The goal isn't to lose that heel reference or have that heel pop off the ground if this is my heel right here. We want to see pronation of the foot coming down the chain from initiating with that hip. The most common mistake on this drill is people are going to want to press their toes into the ground. Not that knuckle of the big toe, but the toes themselves. So something I might do is when Connor's in this starting position, I might cue him to lift all his toes off the ground, feel those knuckles of the toes with weight, and then gently put his toes back down to feel what it's like to have them unweighted for reference. The other most common mistake is people aren't going to start with this plantar flex shin and with their weight more on the outside edge of that heel, which is more symbolic of what we're going to see in something like heel strike. So that way they're gonna start with this shin that is more forward. If you go forward for me, Connor, they're gonna start already in dorsiflexion with that more negative shin angle, and it's gonna give them less space to be able to move through for this motion. And I would say the last most common mistake is they're going to lean their whole torso forward. And what that's going to do is it's going to shift most of his weight onto that midfoot, forefoot, which isn't what we want. We want that to happen as a result of him turning his hips when he's going through this motion fluidly. If someone's having trouble being able to feel that transition of their weight from their rear foot, midfoot, onto their midfoot, forefoot, and that inside edge of their heel, what we can use is a sock that is rolled up to the thickness of a couple fingers underneath their medial arch. So that's going to be underneath and behind the knuckle of the big toe and right in front of that inside edge of the heel. And what this is going to let Connor do is as he goes down into this pronation drill, it's going to let him feel his weight shift from that outside edge of his heel or his calcaneus onto the inside edge as he compresses that sock into the ground. And then as he goes back out of this motion, he should feel that sock decompress, kind of rise up, and his arch move away from it.
I would recommend doing about 15 to 25 very slow and controlled reps on the tibial internal rotation drill. And as for the pronation drill, I'd recommend sets of about 25 slow controlled reps.